Hello, and welcome to What's on My Mind with Fiona. I'm your host, Fiona Kane. There's a few things on my mind today. Firstly, I'm in Sydney, Australia, and there is a cyclone bearing down on southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. And I have sister and brother and cousins and other relatives in and around those areas. So I'm thinking very much of everyone in southeast Queensland and northeast New South Wales. And apparently it's going to hit landfall tomorrow. And I really hope for it's hopefully it doesn't hit landfall, or if it does, as it's said that it will happen, that it'll be relatively minor. So I'm just hoping for safety for everybody and that everyone's okay. So that's very much on my mind because that's happening in Australia right now. But some of the things in the news, the things that I've noticed this week, there's a few things. So I watched Trump's, I don't think it's State of the Nation, but whatever is equivalent to that speech that he did the other day. I thought it was great, loved it. And look, I know people will say, "Oh, it's a performance." Absolutely, it is a performance. That's the point of that speech. Really, it is a performance. It's showing this is what my team have done, or this is what I've done for the country. And Trump's a good performer, so he does it well. So yes, it is a performance. However, he was able to show a lot of things that, like, in what is it, 60 something days or 90, it's not even whatever, 60 something days that they've achieved. So it was great. I think it was really well done. That little DJ, what's his name? I forget his name now. The boy who has had the police uniform, and he's sort of friends with the police, and he wants to be a policeman. He has had brain cancer. It looks like for the last 6 years of his life, he's had many operations, and I think he was originally told he had 5 months to live. And so he's, I think, about 13 now, and he was about 8 when it all began. Lovely boy, and I saw him. He met with Trump the next day, but he got like an ID for being in the Secret Service, and the Secret Service director actually gave that to him. That was a beautiful moment, lovely moment. It's a shame no one on the left, none of the Democrats could appreciate that, or Lake and Riley's family, or Peyton McNabb, who was there. Peyton McNabb is a young girl who she was playing. I think it was volleyball, and there was a man in her team. So a man who dresses like a woman, a better man. And I think he sort of, they call it, spiked the ball. Obviously men are a lot stronger, and it hit her in the face, and she ended up with a traumatic brain injury and part issues with partly paralysed might be the wrong word, but something along those lines. So major issues, and she's never going to have a sports career, and she's been battling with that ever since. And she was there, and what I really love is, and what I always find amazing is that. So the Democrats, a lot of them were dressed in pink, just about supporting women, and all these people that wear Handmaid's Tale outfits and things to protest people like Trump. And it's like, well, what, he hasn't taken away any women's rights. He's actually given them more rights. And the only rights they seem to care about are rights to abort at 9 months, or rights to trans kids. Like, that's the only rights they seem to care about anyway. But the abortion thing, well, that's in the States. It's not a federal thing anymore. So that's got nothing to do with Trump at this point in time. And what he has done, though, is he's banned men in women's sports. The issue that there is, though, that in the American politics, is that presidents can do executive orders, which is what he's done. But the problem is, when the next president arrives, they can just reverse it, which is, what happens every time. They just reverse each other's executive orders. So then what they try and do is they try and get something through Congress to make it a bill, to make it, to bring it into law in a way that's like potentially, hopefully, more permanent. And Trump tried to do that with his banning men in women's sports bill, something, I can't remember, it was called something like that. But that's essentially what it was, to protect women. So their safety, their dignity, things like their scholarships, and also just their sporting careers in general. So that was voted on, I think, the day before the address, and all of not one single Democrat voted yes. They all voted it down, right? And they're the same ones that the next day are wearing pink because they want to represent women's rights. It's like, well, if If you care about women's rights, you would have voted for the bill to actually protect their sport. So you actually don't care about women's rights. You really, really don't. So I just, all this hypocrisy of all of these people that, oh, if I wear a pink jacket, it shows I care about women's rights, even though, I basically don't care if men take over their spaces, and no one, that like no one, none of the Democrats care about these women getting damaged by men who identify as trans, because it's at the end of the day, if the perpetrator is the wrong perpetrator, well, there can't be a perpetrator, so we can't care about those people. So we only care about people who've been damaged by the right perpetrator, and that has to be the white cis straight person, or the Christian or something like that. But if the perpetrator has dark skin, is is a Democrat, is on the left, is say, maybe say, could be Muslim, or any of their groups of people who are, so-called, what was oppressed people, then they're not a perpetrator. It's as simple as that. So if you're oppressed, you can't be a perpetrator. And of course, Peyton McNabb is a white girl, so she can't be. She has to be an oppressor. She can't be someone who's been oppressed. So they've got all of these systems in place that decides who can be a victim and who can't. And so they just wouldn't be nice about anyone or any of the things that happened in that speech, which was really sad. But the saddest thing is they're just selling women down the river. And you always see those street interviews where they go to universities and talk to students, and they talk to students about gender ideology, and they just sound exactly the same. They just use all the same talking points, and they say to them, should men be allowed in women's prisons? And I was like, oh well, they'd be, you know, these these trans men, they'd be harmed if they were in a men's prison, and they're kind of proving the point, as far as, well, that's why we don't want men in women's prisons, because men can be dangerous, and are more powerful and all of that. And then they sort of said to one of them, "Oh, what if the person was a sex predator? You know, had sexually assaulted people." "Oh, let me. I should have to go away and think about that." Do you really have to think about that? Do you really have to think about whether or not you would want a rapist to be put, a male rapist to be put in a female prison? Do you have to think about that? Do you really? So yeah. Anyway, it's just ridiculous. So yeah. So that's. But I did enjoy Trump's speech, and I loved seeing some of the people who were there. And like I said, that little boy DJ, I can't remember his surname now, but it was lovely. And I really hope he does have a long life and gets to be a policeman and all of those things. And yeah, it was great that he was just recognised. And I love it when the people organise those beautiful moments for people, because why not? The world needs some beautiful moments, and to just identify people who are struggling, and need a bit of attention or a bit of support, and it's great. So the other bit of news that I have here is, as of this morning, actually, I saw this on X, is that Sal Grover, who is in the Kickle versus Tickle court case. So essentially, you would have seen me talk about this before. Giggle is her app for women. It's uh, like a friendship app, I don't know, that was friendship, meeting, dating, all sorts of things, but an app that was just for women. She didn't really get to launch it because pretty much upon launch, a whole bunch of men tried to join it, and ultimately one of those men took her to court for kicking him out because it's a women's app. And anyway, his name is Tickle, Roxanne Tickle, Roxy Tickle, of course. And so it ended up being one of the most ridiculously named court cases, I think, in history, which was Tickle versus Giggle, and now it's Giggle versus Tickle because it's continuing on to the next level. And anyway, but one of the things that she is doing, that she mentioned this morning, is she's taking Australia to the United Nations. So because institutional capture has led women being discriminated against because we're female, so she's actually sort of taking Australia to the United Nations. So let's just read here what it says. So just make it a little bit bigger so I can read it. Um, Yeah, okay. So she has lodged a formal complaint with the United Nations Human Rights Committee challenging the Australian government over a federal court ruling that has erased the legal recognition of sex as a protected category. Grover's case, Tickle versus Giggle, saw a biological male successfully argue that Giggle, a female only social networking app, was unlawful for restricting access on the base of sex. The ruling, which has already led to the prohibition of female only lesbian events, sets a dangerous precedent. Women and girls can no longer legally define their own spaces in Australia. So anyway, it goes on. I won't sort of read it all, but essentially, that is great. She's given up a lot for this, and she was sort of pregnant when this first happened, and she's since had a child, and I think her child is 3 or 4 now. So this has been going on for years, and thank you to Sal for doing this, for supporting Australian women. It's a shame that not all Australian women understand. We don't even understand that we don't have rights, let alone why we should fight for them. Uh, that literally Australian women do not have the right to meet and ban men from being in that space if they want to. It's ridiculous. But anyway, and it was our Australian Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, our first female Prime Minister in 2013. It's her government that removed us from the Sex Discrimination Act. So she thanks. That's a lovely thing about these so-called feminist women who throw women under the bus, as in the Gillard government. Great, thank you. So anyway, that's why we're in this issue, in this situation. So essentially we need to change our Sex Discrimination Act. But I'm glad that Sal's just taking it everywhere she can, because it's really important. And you can go to, her name is Sal Grover, and she's on X/Twitter. She's at Sal tweets, Sal, Sall tweets. So if you go there, you'll find a link if you want to support her crowdfunding, that kind of thing, because it's very expensive doing all these court cases. And essentially these court cases, they're about her, but they're not really about her, because this is about rights for all women, because these sorts of cases are the ones that they become the precedent that changes things, right? So we really need people like Sal to be fighting. So the other stuff that's sort of come up this week that's really quite interesting is, here we go, new research from the University of Texas shows that all the justifications for mutilating children were lies. They analysed more than 100,000 patients with gender dysphoria and looked at the outcomes of those who received surgery versus those who didn't. Depression, anxiety, suicidal feelings, and drug abuse were all significantly higher for those who received surgery compared to those who didn't. Let's repeat that. Treating gender dysphoria with sex change surgery was linked with drastically worse mental health outcomes. Phony doctors belong in prison for what they did to our children. Now, those words I read were Charlie Kirk, but what he was doing, he was actually referring to a a report that came out this week. So having a closer look at it, I'm just looking here. Males with surgery had depression rates of 25% compared to males without surgery, 11.5%. Right, so it's more than double the rates. And anxiety rates among that group were 12.8% compared to 2.6%. They're big differences, and this is actually a big group that they've looked at. So the same differences were seen among females, as those with surgery had 22.9% depression rates compared to 14.6% in the non-surgical group. Females who underwent surgery also had an anxiety rate of 10.5% compared to 7.1% without surgery. Now, this is huge. And this is why whenever you see, one of the standard things they've always said is only 1% of people regret their surgery. And it's simply not true. And we know that by looking at this. But you know how they know that? They know that because they never followed anyone up. They only ever followed people up for 3 months, if they followed them up at all. And they'd follow them up for 3 months because in that first 3 months, I've said it before, they have what they call, not all of them, but a lot of them have what they call a euphoria, like a trans euphoria. And now they're in their body they're supposed to be in, they have a euphoria. So they have this kind of brief 3-month window of euphoria that they're glad they've done it, and then they regret it. I'm not saying they all regret it, of course not, but many, many do, which is why we can't allow children to do this, right? Adults have to make their own decisions and live with the consequences. Even then, I have issues, but my biggest issue is children being allowed to do this. And whether it's children or adults, you really need to explore all avenues first. You really need to explore what else is going on, because more often than not, there is something else going on. Now, Dr. Dina McMillan, she commented that, just going to read her comment. These are the same conclusions as a study done in Sweden. It's also common sense. If you mutilate someone in pursuit of something they can never be, once reality sets in, their issues will escalate. Humans cannot change sex. Puberty blockers cause permanent damage, including serious cognitive deficiencies. It's a scam that only serves the unethical medical practitioners who profit from it. And she's absolutely right. So, this is, again, more evidence that we shouldn't be transing children. There was a video I saw the last couple of days. I saw it on, again, I saw this on X. It was posted by at Real Don Keith. I don't know who he is, but this is looks like it was from Instagram. And this woman was doing an Instagram live with her children. And one of the children actually said something along the lines of, he started saying, Mum would be fine. Mum's fine. Like if I'm gay or if I'm a lesbian or if I'm any of those things, mum will be completely happy. I just have to be one of those. And the mother's like, what's going on? He was just saying that mum wants me to be part of the LGBT. I have to be special. I have to be part. I have to be able to call myself part of that. And if I can't call myself part of that, mum won't be happy. And that's the sort of thing that is Munchausen's by proxy. And it's usually it used to be when essentially women would harm their children. So they had a special child who was sick, oh, my kid's got cancer, my kid's got this, my kid's got that. They'd make it up, but they'd actually deliberately do things that harm their children so they could be the mother of the special child. Well, now they do the same thing, but they do it with the trans stuff. And I'm not saying all mothers of trans children do this by any means, not at all. But is a subset of them that are like this. And you see these kids on video. It's all the same in that what's that child's name? Oh, there was a child that did all of this. It was probably one of the very first people who did it all on one of those like Fox channels or whatever. And since 2015, this child, I've talked about him before. He was a boy who transed to being a girl, and I am Jazz, Jazz Jennings, maybe. And that child, throughout that, you see the child saying the same thing. Oh, well, if I changed my mind, mum wouldn't like it much, that. So it gets to the point that even if their parents don't have the Munchausen's by proxy and their parents didn't create it, that certainly it gets to a point where sometimes the buy-in from the people around them, people are so invested in them having this identity that they feel like they can't reverse back out of it. So yes, anyway, so that's again more evidence to say that, and we know this, and that's why the cruel thing is, and you saw this when Elon Musk was interviewed by Jordan Peterson, and I've heard this personally with friends. And friends who have talked about this with their own families, and you see them talking about it online. What happens is these ideologues, they tell you that if you don't trans your child will end their life. So they pretty much threaten you with, do you want, a live son or a dead daughter, or the other way around, whatever it is. And, that's extremely frightening for parents. And so parents respond accordingly and say, well, I don't want my child to die. So if that's what's going to happen, okay, yes, please do the surgery. But they say this with no evidence that it's true. And in fact, it looks like the opposite is true, that they're more likely to harm themselves later if they have transed. And look, there are people who are adults and who have transitioned. And look, you still can't be the opposite sex, but they've transitioned and they live in a certain way and they're happy, and, good on those people. I'm happy for those people to do their thing, as long as they're not forcing other people to change anything on their behalf, as far as, having to use their pronouns or use their private spaces and that sort of thing. But yeah, anyway, this is uh, yeah, just proof that we shouldn't be transing the children. Of course, we shouldn't be transing the children. Like you really need to think about that. That's just the sort of amazing thing it is about this. It's like as if it's something that you really, really need to think about. Um, so the other thing here, oh, yeah, okay. So they're just basically talking about fertility. I won't read the detail, but they're just saying, these gender changes that they do for children, which is their puberty blockers that, oh, they're completely reversible. No, they're not. They actually often make the children infertile, and making this decision for them is terrible. I saw actually another video yesterday of a detransitioner who transitioned, and this person it was a woman, and she had gone the full hog. She'd done all of it. So she'd done what they call top surgery, so had her breasts removed, and bottom surgery, where they've tried to create something that looks like a phallus, and she's just devastated, and she's like, now I'm yeah, and she also had a full hysterectomy, and she's like, I'll never be able to have children. She'll never have normal sexual function. She'll never be the woman that she could have been, and it's this ideology that's caused this to happen. So it's just heartbreaking. I'm having a look here too when we're going back to looking at the sports things. Um, there's this is worldwide so far, the numbers that we have, but it says men and boys have participated in over 11,230 female competitions. It never happens. It hardly ever happens. Why do you care? 11,230 competitions. They've placed first in at least 3,501 times, and in the top three at least 5,937 times. They've stolen $1.6 million in prizes and awards. So that is what happens when you allow boys and men into women and girls sports. And it'll just get bigger and bigger because they're allowed to do it. But of course, it never happens, doesn't happen, fringe issue, blah, 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 except when it does happen. And so it's just the same old story. It doesn't happen. And then, but if it does, it's a good thing. It's just a standard line that you get from them. And there was another further to this where we talk about the children being trans. The Tavistock Clinic, which was the clinic in London, where I think over 1,000 people are suing that clinic because they trans so many children in that clinic, and there were nurses and people that came out of that clinic who were whistleblowers because they just said that the sort of stuff they did there was just horrific as far as basically talking these kids and parents into all sorts of interventions that were life changing, that destroyed their lives, and they're saying this is bigger than the Cass review. The Tavistock Clinic ignored evidence that 97.5% of children seeking sex changes had autism, depression, or other problems that might have explained their unhappiness. In Time to Think, the inside story of the collapse of the Tavistock's gender services for children by Hannah Barnes. So she's obviously written all about this. She said that only 2.5% of the children seen at the clinic had no known associated problems. So only 2.5% of them had no other issues except the gender dysphoria. 2.5%. That's 97 point. I can't count. 97.5% who had other things. Right. So 70% of the referrals had more than 5 associated features, comorbidities such as abuse, depression, self-harm, suicide attempts, anxiety, eating disorders, ADHD, or bullying. 35% of referrals, ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, yet less than 2% of children in the UK have autism spectrum disorder. So even that, but 35%, that was 35%, so they were highly represented, much, much higher represented children turning up with gender dysphoria at this clinic, right? 25% of referrals had spent time in care compared with 0.67 of the general population. So they'd been in, and ones who'd spent time in care were also probably ones who are more likely to have been abused, right? Because that's what happens to these children. That's why usually they're in care, and some of them actually get abused in care. It's terrible. Uh, Children referred were 10 times more likely than the national average, to have a registered sex offender as a parent. So 10 times more likely to have a registered sex offender as a parent. So these children are being sexualized by their parents and they're being abused, and that's what, well, of course, why they don't connect with their body. It makes sense, right? Um, so you can't fix a psychological problem by cutting people's bits off and giving them hormones. It doesn't work that way. 42% of referrals had lost a parent through death or separation. A clinical psychologist was horrified that the highly vulnerable children were wrongly being given irreversible drug treatments. Following referral by Tavistock, but discussion of the subject was shut down by colleagues. And that's what these colleagues who've come out talking about this say. As soon as they said, oh, should we be doing this? Is this safe? Is this the right thing? They were shut down, that you were not allowed to question it. And that's how you know it's a cult, right? You can't question the cult. Children who might not have identified as trans were treated as collateral damage. So they just think it's transphobic to argue it at all. Essentially, we have to do this to all the kids because we're transphobic if we don't, and we've got to save the percentage of children who should be trans, which I believe is none. But anyway, this is their theory, to save the ones who should be trans. Oh well, bit of collateral damage if we change, if we trans the ones who shouldn't be, and they live for the rest of their life with regret, right? And the truth is, a very small percentage of them will be people who identify as trans and will be happy with that ongoing in their lives, and many won't. But hey, let's just do it to all of them because that's a good idea, and that will solve any of them regretting it. It's just, the more information that comes out, the more heartbreaking this is. And this information needs to go to parents and young people so they can understand how much they've been lied to. There's even, I won't go on for too much longer because I've already been blabbing on for too long, I think. But the other thing that's worth mentioning, I've talked about WPATH before, and WPATH were the a World Professional Association for trans, so I can't remember what it stands for. But anyway, this is the association I've talked about before, who pass themselves off as like a proper medical association that's all very legit, and but it's not, as an activist association. And it's this association that set the rules and set the it's a bit like in the psychology, they have the DSM, which the DSM is their manual that says this is how we diagnose and treat certain conditions, whatever. Well, this is the same thing. They create like their version of like the manual that says this is how you diagnose and treat gender dysphoria. The thing is, WPATH is a whole bunch of radical activists. It's not a proper association with proper checks and balances and with science. They're not interested in science. They're interested in ideology, so they just will not accept anything that goes against their ideology. Well, there's one of their former clinicians is a man from Norway, and he's been he's been investigated twice by the Norwegian Health Authority for disregarding recommended safe practice policies in his treatment of minors. His medical license was finally revoked at the beginning of 2023. In 2021, it was revealed he had privately administered puberty-blocking drugs and hormones to a teenager who went on to die by suicide. Now, this guy, his name is Benestad, had advocated for normalising sexual fetishes and has claimed to have introduced the concept of gender euphoria as an alternative to gender dysphoria. He was president at the WPATH conference held in Oslo in June of 2009, where academics involved in pedophilic and sadomasochistic fetish forum presented a concept of unique gender ideology. The concept would later be incorporated into the WPATH That's what it's called, the official WPATH standards of care guidance, and appears to have influenced Benestad's own interest in the subject. He basically, this is a really horrible thing to say, but you've got to understand this ideology for what it is and what it's come from. Uh, this is, I will read what this person said about it, and this is Genevieve Gluck. What she said in regards to this is, one day, hopefully soon, we will look back in horror that we as a society allow children to be castrated in order to appease men with sexual pathologies. That's what this is. So the WPATH standards are made by men who want to call pedophiles minor attracted persons, who want to normalize that, and who want to damage children for their own reasons that I won't go into here, but you can imagine why. All right. So this is a really, really sick ideology, and it's damaging children, making them sick and harming children. I do care about children, and I very much care about children who have gender dysphoria, but we need to help those children, not harm them. And unfortunately, the people who have hold of these associations and what they're very powerful people. You know, everyone's talking about the Epstein Island files and Epstein and all that. Okay, yeah, sure, they're looking at that, but then they're same people are then turning around and saying, oh, but training the children is a good idea, and letting these minor attracted persons, otherwise known as the P word, letting them create standards of care for your children, right? It's like we look in one area, we see it, and the other area we support it, and the cognitive dissonance we have to kind of not see the two things. But anyway, all right, I will leave it at that. They're the things that are on my mind at the moment. Good on Sal Grover for fighting the good fight, and good on people that are doing these studies and putting this information out there. Of course, I'm quite sure that all of the gender activists will say that these studies have all been debunked, because as far as they're concerned, everything that interferes with what they say has been debunked before they've even read it. So everything's been debunked because it doesn't support their ideology. So of course it's been debunked. Yeah. Anyway, I will leave it at that. Again, my wishes are with the people in Queensland, southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. I really hope that this cyclone ends up being very small and not a big problem. And so just thinking of everyone up there, and also just thinking of all the children in the world who are being harmed by this. And I'm hoping that my little bit of talking about this, even if only one person hears this and shares this, and please do tell other people about this podcast. We need to have these important conversations. These are super important conversations, and not everyone realizes this stuff is going on. And people rightly assume, oh, well, the doctors wouldn't do this if they hadn't studied it and didn't know it was safe. And it's simply not true. You only have to look at the COVID vaccine to know that that's not true, or the fact that we used to treat hysterical women by giving them lobotomies and things like that, right? So science doesn't always get it right, and this isn't science, it's ideology. And what they do is they wrap the science around the ideology, but this is no real science. It's just ideology and double speak. And science is important, except for when science interferes with the ideology, and then science is bad. Anyway, I hope you have a good week. I hope the cyclone is a non-event, and I'll talk to you all again soon. Thanks. Bye.